on Introduction to Online Tutoring with SP Tutors, where we'll be signposting you to the most up-to-date evidence-informed research to support online tutoring. My name is Lizzie Swan, and I'm part of the SP Tutors core team, creating a bespoke and responsive training programme for tutors, achieving the SP Tutors vision of accelerating progress for children's learning, especially those most disadvantaged by the COVID-19 pandemic, through high-quality, evidence-informed tutoring. SP Tutors have collaborated with Anspear Publishing to create a mobile learning app, Tutor Know-How. Tutor Know-How places tutors in control of the time, place, and pace of training. The live spotlight sessions form a key element of our specialist training, devised and delivered by a range of expert practitioners from the SP Tutors network. These sessions enhance tutors' evidence-informed practice, highlighting the best and most up-to-date research. Please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you'd like to ask any questions about evidence-informed research on the topic of online tutoring, and I'll do my best to answer them at the end of this session. During this introductory session, I'll be signposting tutors to 5 examples of blog articles which offer tips for evidence-informed online teaching, and also 2 books for further reading. This is an interactive spotlight session, so I hope that you'll join me by visiting these blog sites with me. I'll be posting the URL in the chat bar and also on the slides. For tutors joining us live, please click on the URL in the chat for each blog. And if you're watching us later, please pause the video for each blog and copy the URL into your web browser in a separate window, and then restart your video. There are many blogs at the moment that are exploring the topic of online teaching, but we're going to start first of all with Tom Sherrington's blog. So I'm going to be clicking between screens now. This also gives you an opportunity to click on the blog in the chat function. The first blog we have is by Tom Sherrington, also known as Teach Ahead. And this blog is about principles for remote instruction and notes from the TLAC, Teach Like a Champion Masterclass, following a conversation he's had with Doug Lemov. So during this blog, Tom explores parallels between teaching walkthroughs, which many of you will have already come across using the Tutor Know-How app. And Tom goes through a number of takeaways he gets from exploring his conversation with Doug Lemov in his recent podcast, and also through his reading of Doug Lemov's most recent book about online tutoring. The first area that he talks about with regard to evidence-informed approaches is about dissolving the screen. Here he talks about using pupils' names relentlessly. Again, this comes up through teaching walkthroughs. But here, the first takeaway that Tom signals is around using the pupils' names relentlessly. Involving pupils in a task straight away, signalling that they're in a lesson. Trying as much as possible to avoid that idea of having a delay whilst we're waiting for pupils to join. You may have seen already on many social media sites, teachers and tutors sharing resources where they have a screen that, or a PowerPoint slide or a Google Classroom slide that they have at the start of their session for when pupils are joining their lesson. They maybe put a screen or a slide up, which is a retrieval task or a thunk or one of the icebreakers that I'll share with you at the end of this lesson that gets those pupils who arrive early or promptly to start thinking about. So involve them in that task straight away. The second point Tom talks about is about organising the learning. His third takeaway is about using a regular orientation screen. So a familiar slide at the start of a live or remote lesson that reminds students of their routine, what they'll need for the lesson. Some of the pupils will be in their home environment and they may be outside of their familiar routine, and they may forget that actually they need the same things that they may need within their school environment. Reminding them constantly about what familiar things they need to keep them organised will support their learning, ensure that they're ready for your tutor sessions, making sure we make the most of every moment of possible learning time. His fourth takeaway is around making use of some kind of tracking tool. And again, through SP Tutors, there are lots of opportunities for us to share our reflections on pupils' learning, but making sure perhaps that you share with those your tutees those short wins, as well as reflecting on thinking about the pupils' goals as well. Fifth takeaway, there are lots of types of cold calling methods, thinking about how we can get the pupils to share and how we can get pupils to think about how we might want to be asking for pupils to check their understanding as well. And Tom shares some ideas for how you can check on cold calling using online tutoring. His sixth takeaway is about MCQ for answer and chat to explain. So thinking about actually how can we check for understanding. And seventh is about using weight questions, getting students to prepare their answers in chat and then telling the students when to submit. So really you're not always reliant upon the same really speedy student to always be giving the same answer or to be always answering first. Because in those cases, what tends to happen is the other pupils will just sit back and wait because they'll always know the same pupil will answer in chat first. It could be that a lot of pupils take a little bit longer to process and a little bit longer to type. So if you say to pupils, prepare your answer in chat and I will count you down and that's when I want you to submit your answers. The likelihood is then that you'll get more pupils willing to answer and you'll be able to map the progress of how often those pupils will be answering. Positive narration is absolutely key. And when I trained to teach, I had to script all of my narration. But as a languages teacher, it was imperative that I scripted my instructions for pupils. And again, thinking about reinforcing those positive learning behaviours, you might want to think about actually online are the particular phrases that we might want to be using here. And it might be a good idea to start thinking ahead about what positive language we could be using there. Establishing a process for everybody writes is one of his key takeaways here as well. Again, highlighting pause points in a video presentation. If you are going to be sharing resources that are pre-prepared, do ensure that you script for pupils when you want them to pause. Put a slide in, ensure that it's very, very clear for pupils. Pause here. And then script again for the pupil. Unpause your video. Ensure that the pupil is reminded, constantly provide the pupil with prompts around how you want them to be using that time. And remind them of the key tasks. Give them checklists, simple reminders, and nudges of what you need them to do. And the last takeaway for Tom is about the blended approach, is about using optimal use of time. If you have that contact time with the pupils, think about how you want them to use the time beforehand and how you want to use that contact time with them. And it's about using that time as well to build those relationships and about what you can do to maximize that face-to-face, even if there's a screen between you. So let's move on to our next blog. Our next blog is by Mark Enser. And Mark Enser here has written an article for TESS. So if any of you haven't already had a look at TESS online, I strongly recommend that that's one of the articles or one of the newspapers that you might want to access online. And Mark here is looking at perhaps an overworked teacher, some of us may identify here, remote learning survival guide. So a very, very different approach here to online tutoring and online teaching approaches. And what he does here is he goes through, he's looking at 5 different strategies for supporting online learning. And again, he talks about enjoying some live interaction. So he's saying here about actually thinking about whether or not you need to have cameras, and he's exploring here about the different approaches. You may find as a tutor, if you are a secondary tutor, that many of your pupils at the initial session will prefer to have cameras off. So it's about being really creative about how you can sustain the engagement with tutees without using cameras. Whereas if you're a primary tutor, you may find that actually the pupils prefer to have their cameras on. Finding new ways to ask questions, again, building on Tom Sherrington's blog. You know, expert teachers, as Mark Enser says, ask a lot of questions. And it's about using the chat function and how we use the chat function and how we use wait time and how we prepare pupils to actually use that to ensure that we use that we give the wait time, and we prepare pupils to say, actually, hold off, don't send an answer until we're all ready. Mark here prepares us and says, plan to address misconceptions. If you may not be getting the work back, or you may not have the opportunity as a tutor to be able to access the pupil's work or that response back, consider what are the common misconceptions that may be with this topic. For example, if you're teaching fractions, plan in advance. What are the common misconceptions around learning fractions, and plan to address those common misconceptions at the start. Mark here says, think about talking to your colleagues. We're going to be setting up SP tutors. We've already advertised our tutor tea time. If you can, come along, share your questions in advance, and use that as an opportunity to start building up your tribe, as we call it. Really do use an opportunity to effectively and positively use social media to share resources, to share ideas, and to ask questions. And here, work with your colleagues. Whilst as tutors at the moment, it's very, very different and very challenging to access your colleagues. When you do get that opportunity, as some of you have, to get on site, ask questions, observe if you can, and really get that opportunity to absorb and feel the environment of the schools that you're working in. Mark here talks about making the most of the benefits of remote working. And here he's talking about, actually, there are benefits to remote working. Sometimes we focus more on the negatives. And Mark here lastly talks about listening to the pupils, not the press. So our next blog here, we've got two blogs from Harry Fletcher Wood. And the first one that we're going to look at here is one that was written at the start of the pandemic. And it'd be interesting to actually consider the difference between the two approaches. So the first one is about actually, how schools will approach online learning. And what's quite interesting about this blog is that it's considering what might happen if schools do close. The first one is about actually considering what you might want pupils to do, and they're thinking about actually really focusing down on what you want pupils to achieve. And the key theory here is about keeping tasks simple. Look at the bigger picture and really refine it down. What is the most important thing that you want pupils to achieve? Again, set simple recursive tasks. Really focus on what you want the children to achieve. Think about the three most important things that you want children to take away from that session. What is the bigger picture, and really focus down. Building again on what Marcus focused on and what Tom focused on in his blog, it's about focusing on that, the face-to-face time, again, difficult with the screen in between you, but use time in person to motivate, explain, and practice. Again, it's about using that time with your tutees to really build those relationships and positive connections. And he focuses here, even at the beginning of March, about responsive teaching. It can work at a distance too. We can build those positive relationships, build those connections, even though we may not meet these pupils in person for some time. And lastly, one of the messages here is about picking the simplest tech solutions. Most tutors will be expected to work with the tech solutions that have been chosen by the schools. So some of you may be using Teams, some of you may be using Zoom, some of you may be using Dojos, some of you may be using a variety of platforms initially to work with your schools. The idea there is please work with the platform that the school have chosen for you initially. And it's about ensuring that if you have any questions, go to your key teacher in your school and ensure, because the focus, as if you've been to some of our maths sessions, the focus is around not spending time teaching children about the new technology, but focusing on ensuring that the children spend that time and that energy on the subject that you are delivering. So moving now on to the next blog that we have from Harry Fletcher Wood. This came out in the past few days. And this is about remote responsive teaching. So it's his first challenge that he's addressing here is it's hard to know what students have understood.
See this one, Lizzie, sorry.
No problem at all. So I'm just going to come back and see if I can get that for you. Just going to see if I can get that. Apologies, 1 second.
There it is.
There you
Wonderful.
go, no problem at all. There should be a picture of a tennis player for you. And please don't ask me to identify the tennis player, but I think somebody in the chat probably can. I want to say it's Novak. Let's move on. I realise that this is going to be a recording for some time, and I don't want my lack of knowledge about tennis players. That would make a good icebreaker activity. So he's going to be focusing. Harry Fletcherwood here is focused around some of the challenges, and the idea here is about how we can overcome some of these challenges that are facing teachers and tutors with online teaching. So it can be very, very challenging to identify what students have understood, particularly when there is that barrier. Some of the pupils may be less willing to share some of their work and so on. And Harry here identifies how we can overcome this. And so I won't go through all of these points, but I really do urge you to spend some time going through this blog in particular. The second challenge is it gets also very, very hard to know what students are thinking. And this is a challenge that faces us not just with online teaching, but also within the classroom as well. But it does, online teaching, as he says, allows us to check their confidence easily. Pause for questions in the chat. Another great one, which I really love, is asking students to use emojis to send their reactions in the chat. For students, a lot of the time, children and young adults will express what they're feeling through just sending a quick emoji. So do use that. You can be as innovative or as creative as you want to be. And you can also use hinge questions, but I do strongly urge you to go through this in more detail. The third challenge is it's hard to help every student improve. And he offers here some tangible tips for how to overcome this challenge. You can help students improve without feedback. And there are lots of ways to address those common misconceptions. So we have now our last blog that I'd like to go through now, which is from the LA Times. So we're going to be going to a slightly different part of the world for this blog. And this is by Daniel T. Willingham, who's a psychologist.
It's not showing us this one either, Lizzie. I'm so sorry.
It'll just take I think it takes a minute just to come through. So whilst it's coming through, I'll just take a moment just to explain who Daniel T. Willingham is. He's a psychologist, and he has written an article which was published in the LA Times, exploring some of the challenges of remote learning and perhaps how to overcome these. And this was published in the LA Times towards the start of the pandemic. So we're just going to take a moment and see if that will come through. If not, we have got the chat. And if you are watching us live, you can have a look at that in your own web browser at the moment. And one of the challenges, if you can have a look at that individually, is around that some of the challenges is around Zoom fatigue or online fatigue. A lot of children and also teachers are experiencing that concept of Zoom fatigue at the moment, online fatigue. And also it's about how do we break down the barrier of having screens. So that's one of the areas that he explores from a psychological perspective, as well as the perspective of an educator. So we've had an opportunity now to look through a number of blogs. I would strongly recommend that everybody spends a bit of time reading through those. If you have the opportunity to spend some time, perhaps if you're interested in or have the opportunity to build your network on social media, I'd recommend perhaps taking some time to add some of these people on Twitter, because they're all educators who spend a lot of time sharing blogs and also maybe share resources via Twitter, or other channels. So it gives you the opportunity to build your network, but also build your library of resources. If you would like, there are also 2 books on online teaching with evidence-informed approaches that have been published in the past couple of months. The Doug Lemov book that I referenced earlier is Teaching in the Online Classroom. There is also a book about teaching online by Courtney Ostaff. Courtney Ostaff has been teaching online for I think she's been teaching online for almost 20 years. And she has a vast website filled with resources and support for online teaching. If anybody is looking for ideas around icebreaker activities, how to motivate or engage online learners, I would urge you to go and have a look at Courtney's website as well. Many tutors have been looking at how to build relationships and stronger connections with their tutees, because for many tutors, the first time they meet the children they're going to be working with is in a small group online. And hopefully, many of you will then get to meet these pupils in real life, in the classroom, in school, hopefully not before too long. Some of the icebreaker activities that I'm going to share with you now have been tried and tested by myself over the past few years and more recently through online tutoring. And I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes going through some of those with you now. So that some of them are self-explanatory, as you can see. So the first activity, would you rather? One of the favourite questions is, would you rather have hands for feet or feet for hands? I think if you did a very quick Google of would you rather questions for children, there are lots and lots of questions. And if you just spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes asking those questions, the children can answer in chat or they can answer verbally at the start. If you put 3 questions up on the welcome slide, the children that I have tutored online absolutely love them, but there are many, many questions. If you have a Twinkle account, there are lots of cards that you can get with would you rather questions on that are appropriate for lower key stage 2, even key stage 1 and upper key stage 2. 3 good things and 3 gratitudes are part of the positive psychology interventions. 3 good things is about really getting the pupils to really focus on the 3 good things that have happened either that day or that week. And it's about trying to get the children and the young adults to really scan for 3 new good things that are happening. And if you can reflect back and you can remind the children of those 3 good things the next time you see them. It's about getting them to really build not only on your relationship with them, but about reminding them of the 3 good things that happened in your last session. It's about building up that positive currency and getting credit in the bank. Kim's game is one of my favourite activities. Kim's game is, I put a picture in here because it can be quite hard to articulate. It's a very important activity for children with dyslexia or children with challenges with working memory. I've taken this image from a website where you often put 20 items, random items on a tray. You cover the tray, you remove an item, you show the children the items on the tray with 1 item removed, and the children have to tell you which item is removed. It's a very popular game. You can do this activity if you have a visualizer. It's great to be able to do it live, and you can make visualizers with a mobile phone if you're very, very technically minded, or you can just take photographs and upload those photographs onto your presentation. But this is a really great activity to reinforce children's working memory. How are you? If you can start off by asking the children to just put an emoji in the chat to represent how they are that day. A great way is to, if you can take not a recording, but if you can remember that emoji and you can remind them how they were the previous day, you can build on that. Or you can ask them at the start, how are you? And at the end, how are you? And just get them to tell you in emoji. You're more likely to get a response if you ask for an emoji. 3 things about me, 2 that are true, 1 that's false. You can share 3 things about you that 2 that are true, 1 that's false, and get the children to guess. Children absolutely love it. The more bizarre, the more creative, the better. 20 questions. I know in my house, this is a very popular game for long car journeys. You could pick a topic: animals, transport, pop stars. I don't think the children call them pop stars anymore. I've just shown my age. But if you pick a topic, they can guess 20 questions and you can only say yes or no. All the time you're building the children's vocabulary, and most importantly, you're building relationships and connections. Rank it. So rank from top 10, their top 10, worst to best. Pick a topic, any topic. Thunks. I cannot recommend this book more highly. It has written more of my starter activities than anything else. Ian Gilbert's Little Book of Thunks. If you Google Little Book of Thunks, you'll probably find lots of activities around this. It's 360, I think it's 360 or 260 great questions. Put it on your slide at the start of your lesson. And lastly, one of the best and most beloved of children is show and tell. Ask them to bring you something, and it's more beloved of teachers because of the most bizarre things that children will bring you, and you will learn so much about the children and probably more likely their families. So lastly, if we have any Q&A that you'd like to share with us in this session, I'd love to be able to answer some of your questions around evidence-informed online tutoring. This is very much a brief introduction. I'm delighted that we're going to be following this session with some more in-depth looks at online tutoring. We'll be looking more at the methodologies of online tutoring. We'll be welcoming some expert practitioners to offer you some more in-depth sessions around online tutoring. So I'm going to start with a question. Courtney's surname is Ostaff, Ostaff. She's just written a book for John Catt Educational, and she also has a website. If you Google Courtney Ostaff online, you'll be able to find her website. She's also got a strong presence on Twitter. Any guides to online tools for maths tutoring, especially whiteboards? I believe that there is, they mentioned a couple of the online whiteboards in the previous maths training session that we did. If I can recommend that you refer to their online maths session, if you haven't already received a recording, if you email contact us at contact-us SP Tutors, we'll ensure you get a copy of that recording. It will soon be available on the Tutor Know-How app. The average number of students in an online tutoring session would be around 3 pupils in a session, the same as your live sessions. There are no more questions at this point. If you have any questions that you would like answering, please do email us at contact-us@sptutors.co.uk. If you have any other questions, keep in touch. Please contact us via Twitter or Instagram, and here is our email address. We're absolutely delighted that you've joined us today. I've got one question that's just come in I'm going to answer. Can there be one-to-one sessions with SP Tutors? There can be one-to-one sessions, but that is dependent usually upon the school's need and the special educational needs of the pupil. That's a conversation I would strongly recommend that the school has directly with SP Tutors. I hope that answers your question. Thank you ever so much for joining me today. Oh, and there's a question that's just come in that I will answer via email. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us.